They locked her in the boiler room while the rest of the pack danced, convinced that a defect like her didn't deserve a mate. Shar-Eid was used to the cruelty of the Iron Lake pack. She had accepted her fate to remain invisible, a servant in her own father's house. But destiny has a violent way of shattering the arrogance of the wicked. Tonight, the most feared wolf in the Northern Hemisphere, Alpha King Gideon Cross, has arrived unannounced. He isn't here for diplomacy, and he isn't here for the buffet. He is here because a scent, a pull stronger than gravity, has dragged him hundreds of miles to this exact doorstep. Then when he finds out that Alpha Theron has hidden his queen beneath the floorboards, the music will stop and the reckoning will begin. The vibrations of the basket are thrown through the ceiling, shaking dust loose from the exposed pipes above Shar-Eid's head. She sat on a rusted folding chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, wearing the same gray woolen sweater she had worn for 3 days straight. Above her, the Iron Lake packhouse was alive. It was the night of the winter solstice mating ceremony, the most prestigious event in the werewolf calendar for the Pacific Northwest region. Every unmated wolf from Seattle to Portland was currently on the ballroom floor, sipping champagne and waiting for the moon goddess to snap a metaphysical thread into place and grant them a soulmate. Everyone except Shah. Don't make a sound, her stepfather, Alpha Theron, had warned her an hour ago. His voice hadn't been a shout. Theron rarely shouted. He used a tone that sounded like gravel grinding under a boot. The council is sending representatives. We have investors from Hall Ebert and Logistics here. I will not have my reputation stained by the sight of a wolf who cannot even shift. You stay down here until the last car leaves the driveway. Shah had nodded, not because she agreed, but because she knew the consequences of refusal. At 22 years old, Shah was an anomaly. She had the blood of a wolf, the hearing and the scent, but she had never shifted. To the wolf world, she was a wolf less, a genetic defect. To Theron, she was a liability. Her stepsister Belinda had been more direct. Just before they locked the heavy oak door at the top of the stairs, Belinda had leaned in, her breath smelling of mint and malice. It's for your own good, Shah. Belinda had smirked, adjusting the silk straps of her red designer gown. Imagine if you found a mate tonight. Poor guy. He'd take one look at you. No wolf, no status, wearing rags, and he'd reject you in front of the whole state. We are saving you the embarrassment. The lock had clicked, sealing Shah in the darkness with nothing but the hum of the boiler and the muffled sounds of joy from above. Shah closed her eyes, fighting the sting of tears. She wasn't crying because she was locked up. She was crying because deep down she feared Belinda was right. Who would want her? She worked as an unpaid secretary for Theron Logistics, the pack's trucking company, handling invoices and payroll while Theron took the credit. She was useful, but she wasn't wanted. Suddenly, the noise upstairs changed. The rhythmic thumping of the music cut out abruptly. The muffled roar of conversation ebbed down into a hush so profound Shaw could hear the water rushing through the pipes next to her ear. Shaw frowned, standing up and moving toward the ventilation grate near the ceiling. It was her only window to the world above. She climbed onto the washing machine, straining to hear. A voice amplified by a microphone boomed through the floorboards. It was Theron. But he didn't sound like the arrogant alpha who had ordered her into the basement. He sounded terrified. "Your Majesty," Theron's voice wavered. We weren't expecting you. The invitation was sent out of courtesy. We never dreamed." Silence. The second voice didn't need a microphone. It was a baritone so deep and commanding that Shaw felt it vibrate in her own chest, rattling her ribs. It wasn't just a voice. It was a physical force. It carried the weight of absolute authority. This was Alpha King Gideon Cross. SIA's breath hitched. Gideon Cross was a myth made flesh. He ruled the Western Council with an iron fist. He was a billionaire businessman who owned half the tech sector in San Francisco and a warrior who had supposedly wiped out the rogue insurrection Single and Afshin 5 years ago. He was cruel, they said, cold, unfeeling. "I did not come for your hors d'oeuvres, Theron." Gideon's voice drifted down through the vent, cold as liquid nitrogen. "I was passing through on my way to Vancouver when I felt it." "Felt? What? My kin?" Theron asked. "A pull," Gideon said. "My wolf is restless. He tells me something is here. Someone is here." SIA's heart hammered against her ribs. She pressed her hand over her mouth. "Everyone is present, Your Majesty," Belinda's voice chimed in. She sounded breathless, likely trying to flirt. "All the unmated females of eligible age are lined up right here. Perhaps Perhaps you sense me." There was a pause, the silence so thick it felt suffocating. "You." Gideon's voice dripped with disdain. "You smell like desperation and cheap perfume. Step back before I have my guards remove you." Shaw gasped softly. "No one spoke to Belinda like that. My beta tells me the census lists 42 unmated females in this pack," Gideon continued. "I count 41 in this room. Where is the last one?" Theron's heartbeat picked up. Shaw could hear it even from down here. A frantic thump, thump, thump. "Ah, that." Theron stammered. "That must be a clerical error, Your Majesty. The girl you are referring to, she is unwell. Infectious, actually. A flu. We kept her away to protect the guests." "Infectious?" Gideon repeated the word, flat. "Yes, very. She is in quarantine at the hospital in town," Theron lied smoothly. Shaw gripped the metal grates of the vent. "Liar." She screamed internally. "I'm right here." But she didn't dare make a sound. If she embarrassed Theron in front of the king, he wouldn't just lock her in the cellar. He would exile her, or worse. "Is that so?" Gideon asked. The sound of heavy footsteps began to move. Thud, thud, thud. They were slow, predatory hunting steps. Then why does the scent of vanilla and rain, the scent that is driving my wolf to the brink of madness, led directly to this floor? Shaw froze. Vanilla and rain. That was the shampoo she used, the cheap stuff she bought in bulk because Theron wouldn't give her an allowance. The footsteps stopped directly above her head. "Open this door," Gideon commanded. "Your Majesty." "That's just the boiler room," Theron pleaded, panic rising in his voice. "It's dirty. It's—" "I said," Gideon roared, the sound shaking the dust from the rafters. "OPNTHISDOR." The sound of the lock snapping echoed like a gunshot. It wasn't unlocked with a key. The wood splintered. Someone had kicked it in. Light flooded the top of the stairs, blinding Shaw after hours in the dim glow of the pilot light. She scrambled off the washing machine, retreating to the corner of the room, her hands trembling. She felt small, dirty, and ashamed. She looked down at her oversized sweater and her worn-out sneakers. "Get the lights," a deep voice commanded from the top of the stairs. A moment later, the overhead bulb flickered to life. Shaw squinted, shielding her eyes. At the top of the stairs stood a silhouette that filled the entire door frame. He was massive, well over 6'4", with shoulders that strained the fabric of a bespoke black suit. The man descended the wooden stairs slowly. Every step was calculated. As he came into focus, Shaw felt the air leave her lungs. Gideon Cross was terrifyingly beautiful. He had hair the color of midnight, cut short and sharp. His jaw was square, covered in a shadow of stubble, and his eyes were the color of molten gold. They were glowing. Behind him, Theron and Belinda huddled at the top of the stairs, looking pale and terrified. Gideon reached the bottom of the concrete floor. He didn't look at the rusted pipes or the piles of laundry. His golden eyes locked instantly onto Shaw. For a moment, time suspended. Shaw felt a strange heat bloom in her chest, a tether snapping into place that connected her solar plexus to his. It was a physical pull, magnetic and undeniable. Her inner wolf, usually silent and dormant, suddenly lifted its head and howled. "Mate." The word rang in her mind with the clarity of a church bell. Gideon exhaled, a shudder running through his massive frame. "Found you." He crossed the distance between them into long strides. Shaw flinched, backing into the cold brick wall, expecting a blow. Theron had taught her to fear alpha males. Gideon stopped inches from her. He raised a hand, his fingers trembling slightly, and hovered them near her cheek without touching her. He looked as if he was afraid he might break her. "Did they do this to you?" Gideon asked, his voice low and dangerous. Shaw couldn't speak. She just nodded, her eyes wide. Gideon turned his head slightly, looking back up the stairs. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Theron flinched. "Your Majesty, please let me explain. She is defective. She has no wolf. We didn't want to insult you with." "Insult me?" Gideon laughed, a dark, humorless sound. He turned back to Shaw, his eyes softening as he finally cupped her cheek. His thumb brushed away a smudge of soot from her jaw. "You locked my mate in a cellar like a rat. You dressed the future queen of the Western Hemisphere in rags." The collective gasp echoed from the people crowding the doorway upstairs. "Mate," Belinda squeaked. But she's wolfless. She can't be an alpha's mate. It's impossible. Gideon ignored them. He focused entirely on Shaw. What is your name? Shaw, she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. Sharid. Shar. Gideon tested the name, tasting it. I am Gideon, and we are leaving. Leaving? Shaw blinked. But I have to finish the payroll for Monday. Theron said if I didn't. Gideon growled, a low rumble that vibrated against her chest. You will never work for that man again. You will never set foot in this house again unless it is to burn it to the ground. He slipped his arm around her waist. The heat of his body was overwhelming, seeping through her thin sweater. Do you trust me? Shaw looked up at him. She didn't know him. She had only just met him. But the bond screaming in her blood told her that this man would tear the world apart before he let her get hurt. Yes, she breathed. Gideon swept her up into his arms, bridal style, as effortlessly as if she weighed nothing. He carried her up the stairs, his face set in a mask of cold fury. As they emerged into the hallway, the party guests parted like the Red Sea. Hundreds of wolves in tuxedos and gowns stared in shock. Some bowed their heads in submission to the Alpha King. Others just gawked. Alpha Theron stood in the hallway, sweating profusely. Your Majesty, this is a mistake. She is illegitimate. Her mother was a human who... One more word, Gideon said, not breaking his stride, and I will rip his throat outright, he run or imported Italian marble. Theron snapped his mouth shut. Gideon carried Shaw through the grand foyer, past the stunned face of Belinda, who looked like she had swallowed a lemon, and out into the cool night air. A convoy of black SUVs waited in the driveway. A massive man in a suit, obviously the beta, opened the rear door of the lead vehicle. To the airstrip, Dominic, Gideon ordered as he settled Shaw onto the leather seats. Sir, the beta Dominic asked from the front seat as he started the engine. What about the treaty negotiations with Theron? Cancel them, Gideon said, pulling a cashmere blanket from the seat pocket and wrapping it around SIA's shivering shoulders. Theron Logistics is dead to us. Pull their contracts. Bankrupt them. I want that pack destitute by morning. SIA's eyes widened. You can't do that. Theron will be furious. Gideon looked at her, his golden eyes burning with intensity. Let him be furious. He hurt what is mine. He is lucky I am leaving him alive. As the car sped away, leaving the Iron Lake pack house in the distance, Shaw felt the adrenaline crash. She slumped against the soft leather. Where are we going? She asked softly. Home, Gideon said, taking her hand and intertwining their fingers. To the royal pack. To San Francisco. Shaw looked out the window. She was free, but as the lights of the city faded, a gnawing fear settled in her stomach. Theron was a petty, vindictive man with powerful friends in the criminal underworld. He wouldn't just let his free labor and his punching bag walk away. And Belinda would be seething with jealousy. They won't let this go, Shaw whispered. Neither will I, Gideon vowed. But neither of them knew that back at the pack house, Theron was already on the phone. He wasn't calling his lawyers. He was dialing a number that hadn't been used in 20 years. A number that belonged to a mercenary group known as the Silencers. She's gone with the king, Theron hissed into the phone, watching the tie lights fade. If she finds out about her true lineage. If he finds out who her biological father really is. We are all dead. Intercept them. Kill the girl. I don't care if you have to shoot through the king to do it. The interior of the armored SUV was quiet, save for the hum of the tires against the asphalt and the low murmur of Dominic speaking into his tactical headset in the front seat. Shaw sat frozen, clutching the cashmere blanket Gideon had draped over her. Every time the car went over a bump, she flinched, expecting Theron's hand to strike her. Gideon noticed. He didn't say a word, but his hand moved, covering hers on the leather seat. His palm was rough, calloused from fighting, but his touch was gentle. You are safe, Gideon said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the door panels. No one in this car will hurt you. No one outside of it will get close enough to try. You don't know Theron, Shaw whispered, looking out into the pitch black forest rushing by. He has friends. Bad friends. People who make problems disappear. Gideon's lip curled into a sneer. I am the king. I am the problem that cannot be made to disappear. Suddenly, Dominic shouted from the front seat. Heat signatures. 12 o'clock p. Then, and 3 o'clock a. Then, before Shaw could process the words, the night exploded. A massive concussive blast struck the lead SUV, flipping it into the air like a toy. It crashed onto the asphalt in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Gideon's driver slammed on the brakes, swerving violently to avoid the wreckage. The SUV fishtailed, tires screaming, before coming to a halt sideways in the middle of the lonely highway. "Stay down," Gideon roared, his hand pushing SIA's head toward her knees. Gunfire erupted. Heavy automatic rounds pinged off the bulletproof glass like hail. These weren't normal bullets. They were silver-tipped, designed to burn through wolf regeneration. "Mercenaries," Gideon growled. His eyes flashed, shifting from gold to a blood-red hue. "They didn't send wolves, they sent hunters. They're the silencers." Shaw gasped, realizing what Theron had done. He hired the silencers. Gideon looked at her, a flicker of surprise on his face before his expression hardened into pure rage. "Dominic, protect the girl. If a single hair on her head is touched, I will skin you alive." "Yes, Alpha." Dominic unbuckled his seatbelt, pulling a submachine gun from under the dashboard. Gideon didn't reach for a gun. He opened the door and stepped out into the hail of bullets. Shaw peeked over the dashboard, terrified. "Gideon, no." Gideon didn't even flinch as a bullet struck his shoulder, shredding his suit jacket but flattening against his skin. He was an Alpha King. His skin was harder than Kevlar when he was enraged. With a roar that shook the trees, Gideon began to shift. The sound of bones cracking and reshaping filled the air. In seconds, the man was gone. In his place stood a midnight black wolf the size of a grizzly bear. His eyes burned like hellfire. The mercenaries, dressed in tactical black gear and emerging from the tree line, faltered. "It's the king." One of them screamed. "Shoot him. Aim for the eyes." It was too late. Gideon was a blur of shadow and violence. He covered the distance in a single leap, his jaws snapping around the lead mercenary's torso. He tossed the man 20 feet into the air like a ragdoll. Shaw watched, horrified and mesmerized. She'd never seen an alpha shift with such power. Theron was a strong wolf, but Gideon was a monster. He moved through the mercenaries like a sieve through wheat. Limbs were severed, weapons were crushed, but there were too many of them. While Gideon was engaged with the main group on the left, the rear door of the SUV was wrenched open. Shaw screamed as a gloved hand grabbed her ankle. "Got the package," a mercenary shouted, dragging her out of the car onto the asphalt. "No." Shaw kicked her sneaker, connecting with the man's face mask, but he was too strong. He hauled her up, pressing a chloroformed rag toward her face. "Dominic," Shaw screamed. Dominic was engaged in a firefight at the front of the car, pinning down to snipers. He couldn't reach her. The mercenary dragged Shaw toward a waiting van in the tree line. "Stop struggling, or I'll break your legs." Just as the rag touched her nose, a shadow eclipsed the moon. Gideon had heard her scream. He abandoned the 3 men he was killing, turning Mydra. He landed on the hood of the SUV, his claws gouging deep grooves into the metal, and launched himself over the car directly at SIA's captor. The mercenary didn't even have time to scream. Gideon's massive jaws clamped over the man's head. There was a sickening crunch, and the man went limp, dropping Shaw to the ground. Gideon stood over her, his chest heaving, blood dripping from his muzzle. He growled at the remaining mercenaries, a sound so primal that the 3 survivors dropped their weapons and ran into the woods. Gideon nudged Shaw with his wet nose, checking her for injuries. I'm okay," she stammered, shaking violently. Gideon shifted back. It was a fluid motion, his human form re-smelling instantly. He stood there naked and bloody, completely unashamed. He reached into the SUV, grabbed a spare trench coat, and pulled it on. "Dominic," Gideon barked, his voice calm despite the carnage around them. "Call the cleanup crew. Leave the bodies as a message. And get the backup car." He scooped Shaw up into his arms again. She buried her face in his chest, smelling the iron scent of blood and comforting aroma of cedar and rain. "Why?" she sobbed. "Why did they try to take me? I'm nobody. I'm just a wolf-less servant." Gideon looked down at her, his eyes narrowing. He wiped a tear from her cheek with a blood-stained thumb. "Theron is a greedy man, Shaw. But he is a coward. He wouldn't spend millions hiring the silencers just to retrieve a stepdaughter he hates." Gideon's voice turned grim. "You are not nobody. Theron knows something about you. Something he is terrified I will find out." He kissed the top of her head. "And now I am going to find out exactly what it is." The private jet ride had been a blur of medical checks and silent fury from Gideon. By the time they landed in San Francisco, the sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the Golden Gate Bridge. The Cross Estate was not a house. It was a fortress built into the cliffs overlooking the ocean. High walls, armed guards, and sleek modern architecture screamed power and wealth. As the limousine pulled up to the main entrance, a staff of 20 people stood into perfect lines waiting. "Welcome home, Your Majesty," they chorused as Gideon stepped out, helping Shaw down. Shaw felt painfully out of place. She was still wearing her dirty gray sweater and jeans, now stained with grime from the highway attack. A tall, striking woman with platinum blonde hair and a dress that cost more than SIA's life stepped forward. She looked at Shaw with thinly veiled disgust. "Gideon," the woman said, stepping close to him. "We heard about the attack. Are you injured? And who is this?" She gestured to Shaw as if she were a stray dog. "Saffron," Gideon said coolly. "This is Shaw, my mate." Saffron froze. Her perfect smile faltered. "Mate? But Gideon, she smells like nothing. She has no wolf scent. She's human." "She is my mate," Gideon repeated, his tone brooking no argument. "Mrs. Higgins, take Shaw to the master suite. Prepare a bath and get her something to wear. Burn those rags." "The master suite?" Saffron choked. "But that is your room." "Exactly," Gideon said, walking past her without a second glance. "Dr. Reese with me. I need to run a blood panel on her immediately." An hour later, Shaw felt human again. She had scrubbed the grime off in a bathtub the size of a swimming pool. Mrs. Higgins, a kind, elderly werewolf with a motherly smile, had given her a silk robe. Shaw sat on the edge of the massive king-sized bed, looking at the ocean view. It was beautiful, but she felt like an imposter. The door opened and Gideon walked in, followed by a man in a white coat holding a tablet. This was Dr. Reese. Gideon looked different. He had showered and changed into a fresh suit, but the tension in his shoulders was tighter than ever. "Shaw," Gideon said softly, sitting next to her. "Dr. Reese has the results of your blood work." Shaw wrung her hands. "Is it bad? Do I have a disease?" Dr. Reese adjusted his glasses. "Miss Reed, have you ever taken any medication? Specifically, a daily vitamin given to you by your stepfather?" Shaw nodded. "Yes, since I was 7. Theron said I had a weak immune system. He gave me a booster pill every morning with breakfast. He watched me swallow it." Gideon let out a low growl, his hands clenching into fists so tight his knuckles turned white. "It wasn't a vitamin, doctors," Reese said grimly. "It was a concentrated compound of wolfsbane and silver nitrate mixed with a hormonal suppressant." Shaw gasped. "Poison, effectively, drive." The Reese nodded. "It didn't kill you because your wolf healing factor was fighting it constantly. But it suppressed your wolf. It prevented you from shifting. It stopped your scent from developing. You aren't wolfless, Shaw. You are a wolf who has been chemically lobotomized for 15 years. Shaw felt the room spin. Why? Why would he do that? "Because," Gideon said, taking the tablet from the doctor and showing her a DNA chart. "The suppression masked your DNA signature, but now that it is wearing off, the markers are becoming clear." He pointed to a red line on the chart. "I ran your DNA against the global registry," Gideon explained. "You are not Elsa Theron's stepdaughter. Your mother was not a human." "She wasn't?" Shaw whispered. She had few memories of her mother who died when she was 5. "No," Gideon said. "Your mother was the lunar of the Silver Moon Pack." SIA's hand flew to her mouth. The Silver Moon Pack was a legend. They were the Royal Guard, the strongest warrior bloodline in history, wiped out in a mysterious fire 20 years ago. They were said to be extinct. "If you are a Silver Moon wolf," Gideon said, his voice awed, "you carry the blood of the Alpha Prime. You aren't just an alpha, Shaw. You are royalty, potentially stronger than even me." Shaw stared at him. "Me? Strong? Gideon?" The tent even opened a jar of pickles. "Because you have been poisoned," Gideon said fiercely. "But we are going to flush it out. And when your wolf wakes up, she is going to be magnificent." Suddenly, the bedroom door burst open. Saffron stood there, her face twisted in a snarl. Behind her were 2 members of the High Council, old men in gray suits. "This is ridiculous, Gideon," Saffron shouted. "You are fabricating evidence. She is a fraud. You cannot mate with a defect just because you pity her." Get out, Gideon warned, standing up. Councilman Holloway demands a test. Saffron pointed a manicured finger at Shah. If she is truly of the Silver Moon bloodline, let her prove it. The Silver Moon wolves were immune to the Alpha command. If she is real, use your voice on her. Command her to kneel. Gideon stepped in front of Shah. I will not use the voice on my mate. Do it, Councilman Holloway barked. If she is a fraud, she will be executed for infiltrating the royal house. If you do not test her, the council will remove you from the throne for treason. The room fell silent. Gideon looked torn. If he used the alpha voice, say psychic calm, and that forced submission, it would hurt her. But if he didn't, the council would attack. Shah stood up. Her legs were shaky, but a strange heat was rising in her belly, a fire she had never felt before. Do it, Gideon, she whispered. Gideon looked at her, agony in his eyes. Shah, I trust you, she said. Gideon took a deep breath. He locked eyes with her, his pupils dilated. The power of the Alpha King flooded the room, heavy and crushing like gravity. Knel, Gideon commanded. The force of the word hit Shah like a physical blow. Saffron and Dries. Aris dropped to the floor, instantly unable to resist. Even the council members buckled. Shah felt the pressure pushing her down, commanding her muscles to give in, to submit, to be weak. But then something snapped. Deep inside her chest, behind the cage where Theron had locked it, a beast opened its eyes. It was silver. It was angry. And it did not kneel. SIA's eyes flashed. Not gold like Gideon's. They flashed a brilliant, blinding purple. She stood tall, her chin lifted, fighting the weight of the king's command. She gritted her teeth, sweat beading on her forehead, and took a step forward. "No," Shah said. Her voice wasn't her own. It was a Dwalton, human and wolf layered together. The glass windows of the bedroom shattered outward. Gideon stared at her, his mouth falling open in shock and reverence. She had resisted the Alpha King. Impossible, Saffron whispered from the floor, her face pale with terror. The violet eyes. The legend, shock elapsed, the surge of energy too much for her weakened body. Gideon caught her before she hit the floor, pulling her tight against his chest. He looked up at the terrified council members. J-A-T-O-U-T. Gideon snarled, his eyes glowing. And tell the world. The Queen has returned. For 3 days the Cross Estate was silent, shrouded in a heavy, anxious atmosphere. The staff moved in hushed whispers, and the guards doubled their patrols along the perimeter walls. Inside the master suite, a battle was being fought. It wasn't a battle of claws and teeth, but a war within SIA's blood. Shah lay thrashing on the silk sheets, her skin burning with a fever so high it radiated heat like a furnace. The detoxification process was grueling. Dr. Reese had explained that the 15 years of poison, the suppressant cocktail Alpha Theron had fed her, had calcified in her marrow. Now that her wolf was waking up, it was purging the toxins, literally burning them out of her system. Gideon sat in a wingback chair next to the bed, his tie loosened, his eyes rimmed with rage. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. He refused to leave her. She's in agony, Reese, Gideon growled, his voice cracking as she let out a whimper of pain in her delirium. Give her something for the pain. Dr. Reese shook his head sadly, checking the IV drip attached to SIA's bruised arm. I cannot, Your Majesty. Her body is metabolizing everything at hyperpeed. If I give her morphine, her wolf will view it as another toxin and fight harder, raising her temperature. She has to ride this out. Gideon cursed, standing up and pacing the room. He felt helpless. He was the Alpha King. He could crush boulders with his bare hands and command armies with a single word. But he couldn't stop the woman he loved from suffering. Mom, Shah mumbled, tossing her head on the sweat-soaked pillow. Don't let him take me. Gideon was at her side instantly, taking her burning hand in his cool ones. I'm here, Shah. No one is taking you. Downstairs, the situation was deteriorating. Dominic the Beta entered the room looking grim. He held a tablet in his hand. Gideon, Dominic said quietly. We have a problem. A PR nightmare. Gideon didn't look away from Shah. Handle it. I can't, Dominic said. You need to see this. He tapped the screen and held it up. It was a live news broadcast from the National Wolf News Network. The headline screamed ALPHAKINGT, INGTIDNAPSDA, UGHTAROFPROMINE, and TBUSINESSMAN. On the screen, Theron sat in a studio looking like a broken man. He wiped a fake tear from his eye. She is mentally unstable. Theron sobbed to the camera. My poor Shaw. She has suffered from delusions for years. We kept her in the house to protect her. And then King Gideon broke into our home, assaulted my staff, and dragged her away. I fear for her life. I beg the council, bring my daughter home. Gideon let out a roar of fury, snatching the tablet and smashing it against the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. He is spinning the narrative, Gideon snarled. He knows he can't beat me in a fight, so he's trying to destroy my reputation. He's turning the public against the crown. It's working, Dominic admitted. The council is bombarded with calls. Packs from the southern territories are demanding proof of SIA's safety. Saffron is already talking to the press off the record, confirming that she'll look drugged when you brought her in. Saffron, Gideon hissed. I will deal with her treachery later. Suddenly, charged her back, the scream tearing from her throat. The sound was a guttural roar. It's happening, Doctor, Arise shouted, checking the monitors. Her heart rate is spiking to 200. The wolf is breaking the seal. Gideon grabbed SIA's shoulders, pinning her gently to the bed as her bones began to crack. It was a horrifying sound, the sound of anatomy rearranging itself. Usually, a first shift happened at puberty. Shaw was 22. Her bones had hardened. This was going to be excruciating. Look at me, Shaw, Gideon commanded, using a fraction of his alpha tone to cut through her haze. Focus on my voice. My mate. Don't fight the pain. Embrace it. Let her out. SIA's eyes flew open. The violet light was blinding, illuminating the dim room like a flare. Gideon, she gasped, her voice distorting into a growl. It hurts. I know, my love. I know, Gideon whispered, leaning his forehead against hers. I am right here. I will anchor you. He opened his own mental barriers, flooding their bond with his strength, his calm, his love. He siphoned off her pain, taking it into his own body. Gideon flinched as he felt the ghost of her agony, his own bones aching in sympathy. Outside, the sky turned dark. Thunder rumbled over the ocean, shaking the glass of the balcony doors. It was as if nature itself was reacting to the birth of the silver wolf. Theron. Shaw grit her teeth, her jaw elongating. He lied. Yes, Gideon promised. And he will pay. But first, you must become who you were meant to be. With one final bone-shattering crack, SIA's human form dissolved. The scream cut off, replaced by a deep, resonant snarl. Standing on the bed, shaking off the shreds of the silk robe, was a creature of breathtaking beauty. She was smaller than Gideon's wolf, but leaner, built for speed and lethal precision. Her fur was not gray or brown. It was a shimmering metallic silver that seemed to glow in the darkness, and her eyes to pools of electric violet stared into Gideon's soul. Dr. Reese dropped his clipboard. By the goddess. The prophecy is true. The Silver Queen lives. The wolf Shaw threw back her head and howled. It wasn't a mournful sound. It was a declaration, a song of freedom that shattered the windows and echoed miles down the coastline. Gideon smiled, tears of relief streaming down his face. He began to unbutton his shirt. Dominic, Gideon ordered without looking back. Clear the perimeter. Open the gates. My mate needs to run. Gideon's eyes flashed gold. And I intend to chase her. The sensation was intoxicating. Shaw felt the cool Pacific wind rushing through her silver fur. The pain was gone, replaced by a surge of power so intense, she felt she could outrun a lightning bolt. She was running through the dense Renwood forest surrounding the Cross estate. Every sense was dialed up to maximum. She could smell the sap in the trees, hear the heartbeat of a deer a mile away, and feel the earth vibrating under her paws. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the weak, clumsy girl in the basement. She was a predator. She was a queen. Behind her, a massive black shaped her through the underbrush. Gideon. He was chasing her, his giant black wolf keeping pace easily. It was a game, a mating dance. He would nuzzle her heels, urging her faster, and she would zigzag through the trees, testing his reflexes. You are fast, Gideon's voice echoed in her mind. It was a telepathic clink, clear as day now that she had shifted. I am free, Shaw replied, her mental voice sounding like wind chimes. They broke through the tree line onto a secluded beach. The moonlight reflected off the wets, and Shaw slowed, trotting toward the water. She had never seen the ocean close up. Theron had never allowed her to leave the town limits. She dipped a paw into the cold water, yipping in surprise, then playfully splashed Gideon as he approached. The massive alpha king, the terror of the West, shook his wet fur and tackled her gently into the sand. They rolled together, nipping and nuzzling, cementing the bond between their souls. For an hour, the world of politics, poison, and betrayal didn't exist. There was only the moon, the sea, and the mate who had saved her. But the real world has a nasty habit of intruding. Gideon's ears suddenly perked up. He stiffened, looking toward the cliffs where the estate sat. "We have to go back," Gideon said, his tone shifting from playful to serious. "Dominic is calling me. Something has happened." They ran back to the estate, shifting back into human form behind the privacy of the garden walls where staff had left robes for them. When they entered the war room, a high-tech command center in the basement of the castle, the mood was catastrophic. Dominic stood over a holographic map table. Councilman Holloway was there along with 3 of Gideon's generals. Even Saffron was present, standing in the corner with her arms crossed, looking pale. "Report," Gideon commanded, tightening the sash of his robe. He pulled a chair out for Shaw, seating her at the head of the table next to him. The generals looked at Shaw uneasily. They had seen the news. They knew the rumors. But when Shaw looked at them with her lingering violet gaze, they quickly averted their eyes in submission. "It's bad, Your Majesty," Dominic said, pointing to the mat. Red lights were blinking along the northern border of Gideon's territory. "Theron hasn't just gone to the press. He has mobilized. He's a logistics manager," Gideon scoffed. "He has trucks, not soldiers. He has money," Dominic corrected. "And he has support. The Northern Alliance, the pack leaders who have always hated your strict laws against poaching and territory expansion, have joined in. They are using the rescue narrative as an excuse to invade." "An invasion force?" Gideon looked at the map numbers. 3,000 wolves, General Vance said grimly. "They are gathering at the border, 40 miles from here. They have heavy weaponry, and they have something else." Vance pressed a button, bringing up a grainy satellite image. "Those are sound cannons. Military grade," Gideon noted, his face darkening. "Where did a trucking company get sonic weapons designed to incapacitate wolves?" "That's the question," Dominic said. "Someone is funding them. Someone with deep pockets and government connections." Shaw stared at the map. She saw the red dots converging. They were coming for her. Theron wasn't just trying to get her back, he was trying to wipe out the cross line. "He wants me," Shaw said, her voice steady. The room went silent. "Theron doesn't care about me. He cares about my blood. He knows that if I learn to control my power, I can challenge his claim to the Iron Lake lands. My mother. She owned that land before he married her, didn't she?" Gideon looked at her, impressed. "Yes. The Silver Moon territory was massive. Theron absorbed it when your mother died. If you are alive and capable, the land reverts to you by ancient law. He loses everything. So he has to kill me," Shaw concluded. "He will have to go through an army of dead bodies to get to you," Gideon vowed. "There is another issue," Saffron spoke up from the corner. Her voice was trembling slightly. "How did they know about the perimeter weak points?" "Look at their approach vector. They are bypassing our main watchers. They are heading straight for the aqueduct tunnels." Gideon froze. The aqueduct tunnels were a secret entrance known only to the inner circle and the High Council. "You're right," Gideon said slowly, scanning the faces in the room. "They have inside information." The air in the room turned frigid. "A traitor." Gideon's eyes landed on Councilman Holloway. The old man was sweating, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "Holloway," Gideon said softly, "you were very insistent on testing SIA's blood yesterday, almost as if you wanted to confirm something for someone else." "Your Majesty," Holloway sputtered, standing up. "I resent the implication. I am a loyal servant of the Crown. Are you?" Gideon walked around the table. "Then why does your heartbeat sound like a hummingbird trapped in a cork?" "It's the stress," Holloway yelled. "We are on the brink of war." "Sir," Dominic interrupted, looking at his data pad. "I just ran a trace on the communication logs. An encrypted burst transmission was sent from this building 10 minutes before the Northern Alliance began their march. It originated from the guest wing." Holloway turned pale. "The guest wing was where the council members stayed." "It wasn't me," Holloway screamed. He pointed a shaking finger at Saffron. "It was her. I saw her near the comms relay." Saffron's eyes widened. "You lying old goat." I was in the kitchen getting coffee. Ayen-Ough, Gideon roared. The Alpha came and slammed everyone into silence. We will find the rat, Gideon said, his voice cold death. But right now, we have an army on our doorstep. Dominic, mobilize the Royal Guard. Vance, prep the perimeter defenses. He turned to Shaw. Shaw, I want you in the safe room. The bunker is impenetrable. Shaw stood up. She looked at the map, then at the window where the first rays of dawn were breaking. She thought about the years in the cellar, the years of silence, the years of being a victim. No, Shaw said. Gideon blinked. No, I am done hiding in basements, Gideon. She reached out and took his hand. Her violet eyes burned with a new, terrifying resolve. I am the Silver Queen. This is my war too. I'm not going to the bunker. She looked at the holographic map. I'm going to the front line. The dawn broke not with sunlight, but with the screech of metal and the roar of engines. The Cross Estate, usually a sanctuary of silence and sea breeze, was a war zone. The perimeter walls, 30 feet of reinforced concrete, shuddered as the first volley of missiles struck the northern gate. Gideon stood on the battlements, the wind whipping his trench coat. His eyes were glowing molten gold, his claws fully extended even in human form. Next to him stood Shaw. She wasn't wearing a gown or a servant's rag. She was dressed in black tactical fatigues, a silver chest plate strapped over her heart, and her hair tied back in a severe braid. They are breaching Sector 4. Dominic yelled over the sound of sirens, pressing a hand to his bleeding ear. They used the access codes. The electrified fences were deactivated from the inside. Gideon whipped around, scanning the chaotic courtyard below. The traitor. At that moment, the main gates groaned. The massive steel doors designed to withstand a tank began to slide open. Standing at the manual override console in the guard booth, visible through the glass, was a woman in a jagged red dress. Saffron. She looked up at the battlements, locking eyes with Gideon. Her face was a mask of tear-streaked madness. If I can't be your queen, Saffron screamed, her voice amplified by the intercom system, then you will rule over a graveyard. Saffron, no. Gideon roared, vaulting over the railing. It was too late. The gates swung wide. A fleet of armored trucks bearing the logo of Theron Logistics roared into the courtyard. But these weren't delivery trucks. The roofs slid open to reveal mounted sonic cannons. Cover your ears, Gideon bellowed to his guards. The cannons fired. There was no explosion, only a high-pitched oscillating frequency that tore through the air. It was a weapon designed specifically for the sensitive hearing of lycanthropes. All around the courtyard, the Royal Guard collapsed. Wolves shifted back into humans involuntarily, clutching their heads, bleeding from their ears and noses. Even Gideon stumbled, falling to one knee as the sound wave hit him like a physical hammer. He roared in agony, his vision blurring. Shaw stood on the battlements, her hands gripping the stone railing. She braced herself for the pain, but it never came. She heard the screeching noise, but it was distant, annoying rather than habilitating. The Silver Moon bloodline wasn't just stronger, it was ancient. Her physiology operated on a frequency that modern technology couldn't touch. Below, the invasion for sport out of the trucks. Mercenaries led by Colonel Jackson, the scarred human with a silver-plated shotgun, began executing the incapacitated guards. And then a black limousine rolled into the center of the carnage. Alpha Theron stepped out. He wore a pristine white suit, stepping over the writhing body of a young guard with a sneer of distaste. He held a megaphone. "Look at you," Theron's voice boomed. The mighty Gideon Cross, brought to his knees by a little frequency modulation. Theron walked toward Gideon, who was struggling to stand, blood dripping from his nose. "You stole my property, Gideon," Theron spat, kicking the Alpha King in the ribs. Gideon groaned, too disoriented to fight back. "And now I'm going to take her back. And I'm going to skin you and mount your head in my office. Leave him alone." The voice rang out from the battlements, clear and bell-like. Theron looked up, shielding his eyes against the rising sun. Shaw stood on the ledge, looking down at him like a destroying angel. "Oh, the runt." Theron laughed. "Come down, Cher. Daddy has a new collar for you. A shock collar this time." Shaw closed her eyes. She reached deep inside, past the fear, past the trauma of the basement, past the years of silence. She found the silver wolf coiled and ready. "Are you ready?" she asked her beast. "We're the storm," the wolf replied. Shaw opened her eyes. They were violet stars. She didn't climb down. She jumped. She fell 3 stories, shifting in Mydra. The transformation was instantaneous, a flash of silver light. She landed in the courtyard, not as a woman but as the Silver Wolf, creating a shockwave that cracked the pavement. The mercenaries turned their guns on her. "Fire!" Colonel Jackson screamed. Bullets hailed down on her. But Shaw was a blur of motion. She was faster than sound. She zigzagged through the gunfire, a silver streak of death. She didn't attack the men, she attacked the trucks. She leapt onto the roof of the lead vehicle. With a single swipe of her claws, she sheared through the metal mounting of the sonic cannon. She ripped the device free and hurled it into the oncoming squad of soldiers. 1 down, 3 to go. "Kill it. Kill the beast." Theron screamed, retreating behind his bodyguards. Gideon, seeing his mate fighting alone, found a reserve of strength. The destruction of the first cannon lessened the pressure on his mind. He forced the shift, his black wolf exploding forth. He joined the fray, a shadow of vengeance beside SIA's silver light. They moved in perfect synchronization. Gideon was the brute force, crushing the armored vehicles and tearing through the mercenary lines. Shaw was the precision, targeting the sonic weapons and the commanders. Within minutes, the tide turned. The Royal Guard, freed from the sonic assault, began to rise and join the fight. The courtyard became a slaughterhouse for the invaders. Alpha Theron saw his army collapsing. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced his arrogance. He turned and ran toward the open gates, scrambling for his limousine. Shaw saw him. She let out a snarl that froze the blood of everyone on the battlefield. She ignored the mercenaries firing at her flanks and launched herself in pursuit. Theron fumbled with the door handle. "Open! Open, damn you!" He managed to get the door open, but before he could climb inside, a set of jaws clamped around his ankle. He screamed as he was dragged backward across the asphalt. Shaw threw him into the center of the courtyard, away from the weapons, away from his escape. She shifted back to human form. She stood over him, breathing hard, her tactical gear torn. Blood splattered across her face, but none of it was hers. Theron scrambled backward on his elbows, terrified. Wait. I'm your father. I raised you." "You jailed me," Shaw said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You poisoned me. I did it to protect you." Theron lied, his eyes darting around for a weapon. He saw a discarded silver knife a few feet away. "Your mother. She was a monster. Her power killed her. I didn't want you to die like her. My mother died because you poisoned her too." Shaw realized, the pieces falling into place. "She didn't die of a sickness. You killed her for her land." Theron's face twisted into a snarl. He lunged for the knife. "You ungrateful little." He was fast, but Gideon was there. The Alpha King stepped on Theron's wrist, crushing the bones. Theron shrieked, dropping the knife. Gideon stood beside Shaw, handing her a heavy ironwood spear he had pulled from a decorative display during the fight. "He is yours, my queen," Gideon said. Theron looked up at Shaw, tears of pain and fear streaming down his face. "Shaw, please. Mercy. And family." Shaw looked at the man who had stolen her life. She thought about the cold nights in the cellar. She thought about the way he made her feel small. "You are right," Shaw said softly. "Mercy is a quality of a queen." Theron let out a breath of relief. Yes. Thank you. But I am not just a queen," Shaw continued, her eyes flashing violet. "I am a wolf." She didn't use the spear. She dropped it. She wouldn't give him the dignity of a warrior's death. "Get out of my territory," Shaw commanded, using the alpha voice. It was more powerful than Gideon's. It resonated in the stones of the castle. "If I ever see you, smell you, or hear your name again, I will not stop at breaking your wrist." Theron scrambled up, clutching his broken hand, sobbing. He looked at the carnage of his army, then at the glowing eyes of the girl he had abused. He turned and ran. He ran out the gates, past the burning trucks, into the woods, stripped of his dignity, his company, and his power. He would die in the woods. Shaw knew a rogue with no pack and no money wouldn't survive a week in the wild. His fate was sealed. Silence fell over the courtyard. The surviving mercenaries had surrendered. Saffron was being led away in handcuffs by Dominic, her head hanging low. Gideon turned to Shaw. He looked at the blood on her face, the fire in her eyes, and the silver aura that still clung to her skin. He dropped to one knee. One by one, the Royal Guard followed suit. Dominic knelt. The staff knelt. Even the captured mercenaries bowed their heads in instinctive submission to the apex predator. "Long live the queen," Gideon whispered, taking her hand and kissing her knuckles. Shaw squeezed his hand, pulling him up to stand beside her. She didn't want him on his knees, she wanted him at her side. "Long live the pack," Shaw corrected. She looked out at the ocean, the sun fully risen now, painting the water in shades of gold and violet. The runt of the litter was gone. The girl in the basement was a memory. The Silver Queen had come home. And so the girl who was locked away in the dark became the light that saved a kingdom. Shahid proved that true power isn't about physical strength or status, it's about the spirit that refuses to break even when the whole world is against you. She found her voice, she found her mate, and most importantly, she found herself. You have just listened to the rising legend of the Silver Queen and her unbreakable spirit from the Moonlight Mates Library. If my journey from the darkness of the boiler room to the brilliance of the silver moon moved you, please destroy that like button. Your engagement truly helps us tell more stories. I'm curious to hear your theories. What do you think happened to the cruel stepsister Belinda? Does she deserve a chance at redemption, or should she share her father's fate? Let's meet in the comments below. For more tales of ancient bloodlines and love that conquers all, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell. Until the next chapter, sweet dreams.